Hello and a very warm welcome to Provoking Thought. Thank you for all your viewership over the years, and may I please ask you to press the subscribe button on your screen. Thank you. The winds of election appear to be swirling around. First, there's an election for the presidency coming up this year. Later, there will be a chance to vote for a new parliament. How will the people decide? What are the issues? To help us with provoking thought is Member of Parliament, Mr. Eran Wickramaratne, senior banker, retired of course, and now a member of the economic team from the SJB and a Member of Parliament of course. Let's provoke thought. Thank you, Eran, for joining us. How do you see the issues and what are your party's solutions?
Thank you very much, Faraz, for inviting me to be here. Sri Lanka, as you know, has gone through a period of turmoil. We've gone through a period in which people have been on the street, a lot of dissatisfaction, people are not happy with the systems in the country, and ultimately the president of the country had to flee the country. And the present parliament, continues. So we have a president who was elected, legal, but not always thought of as legitimate. We have a similar situation in parliament. We are legal, elected, but people have in their minds whether we are actually legitimate. And therefore an election is inevitable, because it's only through an election that you could actually correct the situation. We have a president presently elected by parliament who doesn't have a direct mandate from the people either. So again, legal but illegitimate. So elections is absolutely necessary. So this is going to be one of the reasons why you need to go to the country. In terms of issues, lots of issues, right? The issue that is on the common man's mind at the moment is really cost of living. They're finding it impossible to meet their expenses. Incomes haven't risen in the past period, but inflation soared in the past period. So the price of goods and services have gone sky high. Food, nearly 100% inflation. Other inflation is about 70%. Now at the moment, I must say that inflation has been checked, which is good. But even if inflation is checked, the prices of food remain where they are, and incomes haven't really compensated. So still there's a lot of tension. So there's a lot of social tension as a result. And the question is, how do we actually address this, the economic issue? Then people have also lost confidence in the system, and it's a systemic issue. And I would put it like this: if you ask me what the number one issue facing this country, even more than the economy, I will say is lack of confidence in the system. And that is a lack of confidence in the implementation of law and order. Every citizen needs to feel that they are equal. They need to feel that they are accepted. They need to feel that if they go before the justice system of the country, that there will be justice. And I think that fundamental issue is very, very critical that we establish it. It also helps because when confidence is built, it helps with the economy as well.
Just only because you mentioned the rule of law and the confidence in the system, we note that in recent months the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka have given some very groundbreaking, if you like, decisions upholding the Constitution and very clinically going through that. The most recent one, of course, to do with the presidential pardon, constitutional right granted to the president, but we understood that the president can't act on his own. He has to follow the scheme and uphold the rule of law. So that's interesting. But honestly, when you look at the wider picture, Eran, and the people out there in the rural areas and so on of Sri Lanka, surely what must be uppermost in their mind is the cost of living. It is horrendous. All bills, all utilities have gone up and so on, and the cost of food has gone up. How does your party, specifically your party, what are your solutions to try and bring some balance in terms of the cost of living?
Yes, I might want to just make a quick comment on what you said. There's a glimmer of hope that the Supreme Court of the country has been really giving some verdicts which we haven't seen in decades. Significant verdicts. A mayor has been put in prison for acting outside the law. The recent verdict was given that who is responsible for the financial crisis. The former president of the country, his brother the prime minister of the country, his other brother who is the finance minister, then governors of the central bank, Ministry of Finance secretaries have all been put by the court as responsible for the present financial crisis. Now this is a significant thing that hasn't happened in years and years, and as you said, there is a ray of hope with the verdicts being given against presidents, and as you said, referred to the most recent one, which is also against a president using his powers, and the Supreme Court saying you have used your powers extraordinarily and that's not permissible. So clearly there is a ray of hope. And why I wanted to mention this point is often Sri Lankans think that this 225 in parliament can fix the system. They can't. They have limitations, what they can do and what they can't do, right? The others, the institutions in this country, the professionals in this country need to stand up. I'm a professional myself. I left my profession to come in because some people must help from outside, some people need to get into the system. They must stand up, and it's good to see that happen. And therefore the law and order situation, there's a glimmer of hope that maybe we are now moving in the right direction and everybody else will follow what the Supreme Court is doing. But coming to your bigger, wider question about the cost of living which is affecting people, how are we actually going to tackle the issue of the cost of living? So when you are in a crisis, a financial crisis, you are bankrupt, i.e. you are not paying your loans. One of the issues was that this has been coming for quite some time. We saw this coming in the last period when we were in government, and we had to address it. We had to bring the budget deficit down, and therefore revenues had to go up. So this is based on a fiscal consolidation of actually increasing revenues. We did that in the past. When we took office, revenue was about 10% of GDP. We increased it to 13% in a 2-year period. The tax net was only about 700,000 files. We increased it to 1.7 million files. But inflation did not go up. We had the lowest possible inflation. Interest rates didn't go up, so businesses were not affected. What has happened presently is, in this crisis, is that they followed the wrong economic policy. They thought that by printing money that they could actually have economic growth while trying to do fiscal consolidation. That doesn't really work, and that's why we are in this crisis.
So what are your party's solutions to that?
Yeah, so at the moment what they have done is they have taken the easy way out. To raise revenues, they have gone the indirect route, and they have raised, for example, indirect taxes, value-added taxes and so forth. They have basically brought virtually everything, 83 more items under the value-added tax system, which is raising this. And as a result, cost of living goes, the poor get pressed, social unrest is being created. What is our solution to it? I think we have to rebalance it. There is no question that revenues must be raised, but the present program doesn't take into account looking at cost, wastage, corruption. We have a program to look at that. And also, we also have to move away from indirect taxes to looking at more at direct taxes. We have to raise the revenues, no question about it, no debate about it. But we have to take the taxes from people who can actually pay. If you take VAT, for example, it's almost doubling in terms of revenue in this coming year according to the present budget. We basically have to reduce that VAT. There is no question about it. That's the only way that we can bring the cost of living down. But then how do we bridge the gap? We have to take it from people who can actually pay. So even the IMF has identified it in their report, and they have said you need to look at people who are due to pay taxes, who are not paying taxes, take it from them, and lots of corporates as well. Also, we will have to look at the wealthy. We have to look at property. It mentions it specifically, inheritance taxes and so forth. So these are things that will have to be looked at. There is no question about it. I think if somebody comes and says we'll just cut taxes, we're going to do the same thing Gotabaya Rajapaksa has said at that time, and that will be irresponsible. If we are cutting indirect taxes to bring the cost of living down, we certainly will have to look at other taxes and take it from the people who could actually pay.
So are you saying, Mr. Wickramaratne, that your party will not fear taxing the rich? And in fact, who are the rich? What's the yardstick?
I think that we need to be very clear on this. Our party believes in the private sector, believes in the economy. We want to encourage economic growth. But we must also say that we have to protect, socially protect, the poor and the vulnerable in society. And Sri Lanka's vulnerable in society today is increasing because we have one of the fastest aging populations as well. And we have to be conscious of it. So social protection with an open economy is the balance that we have to draw. So there is no question that taxes, revenues have to be up there. We will have to tax those who can pay.
That's fair and square, but let me give you an example of something here. If you take the ministry, if you take water, we have I think we have 3 different ministries for water. Surely, isn't there a case for streamlining the cost of governance?
Certainly there is a case. The Samagi Jana Balawege, which is a political party I belong to, we have academics and we have professionals. They have been working on this for 1.5 years, and we have come up with certain policies, and we are doing public consultation at the moment. And one of the things is we have tried to rationalize everything to 27 subjects. That's where we are presently. Now, how do we convert it actually into a very valid point that Faraz you are raising is the duplication of ministries and institutions and so forth. And we are basically rationalizing it, and we think that the cabinet should be limited. This question about if you form a national government, there is no limit, the limit goes out and so forth. I think those are issues that we have to directly face, because the country certainly needs to look at rationalization, efficiency, reducing the cost, and that's something we are committed to do.
Isn't it true to say that these duplication of ministries and so on, they actually are designed to aid corruption and an increased cost of governance, because it's part of this so-called political patronage and almost a political right to make money when you are elected?
Yes, it works like this for us. The constitution has limited the cabinet to 30, but it has a clause which says if you have a national government, there is no limit and you can increase it. And that is to get others into government. It is used. But if you constitutionally actually amend it, then everybody knows that's the law, and that will help. So we need to look at systems actually, and a systemic change there. Of course, the issue you are talking about, patronage and corruption, that's a widespread issue in this country. It's not only, this is not the only means. That absolutely has to be tackled.
True. Let's move on to trade and your party's perspective. We are, of course, in conversation with Mr. Eran Wickramaratne, Member of Parliament from the SJB, and part of their economic team, as I call it. How will your party boost foreign exchange inflows? What would you do for exports?
Yeah, Faraz, I would like to say this as well, because you asked that question on corruption. One of the key things is going to be, right, is that we need to have an independent public prosecutor. We need to build institutions. We need to build independence from the executive, because corruption is related to the executive. And we want to push for an office of an independent public prosecutor as well. That's how systems changes are brought about. To go into the question about trade and investment, absolutely necessary. The focus will have to be on trade. It will have to be on exports. Now, one of the reasons the country is bankrupt is, instead of going in for trade, we went into basically investing in hard infrastructure, not out of the capital and reserves we have, but by borrowing money. Absolutely crazy. If we put that money in trade, we would have had much better results. So trade will be given priority. Sri Lanka is only 22 million people. The subcontinent that we are in is nearly 2,000 million people. This is, our market is global. Only way to raise the living standards of people living in this country and Sri Lankans is actually to be integrated to the rest of the world and treat the rest of the world as our market. Therefore, exports will have to get prime place, and we will have to look at regulations, we'll have to look at basically making it easy for investors, from the simple thing like registering a company to getting a piece of land, you know, to do your business, to getting approvals on factories and offices, and that whole heap of things should be looked at in terms of regulation.
I hear what you say, and it's interesting that you say that, you know, you're talking about foreign investment and so on. But how aware is your party that globally there is a greater tendency to link trade and concessionary agreements with human rights and the rule of law? Corporates are very concerned that they are doing business with countries that uphold these basic values, human rights and the rule of law. How aware is the SJB of this growing tendency?
This country has only two options: either to build the walls and close ourselves and do things as we have been doing for the last 30 years and just, you know, go in circles. You know, being rich country when I was born, to go to the bottom of the Asian grid is terrible. You know what has happened here. If we are going to reverse it, we have to integrate with the rest of the world. When we integrate with the rest of the world, clearly global values will have to be respected. Human rights is one of those global values, and it will have to be respected. And we know that our present markets are largely the US, it's Europe. These are present markets. Certainly we need to go for a diversification of markets. There's no question about it. But we also need to uphold human rights. The ICCPR in 1948, Sri Lanka subsequently became a signatory to it. It has to be upheld. Now, there is a law being brought into Parliament this coming week called the Online Safety Bill. This is an example that I'm using. And this Online Safety Bill is going to restrict the freedom of expression. It's not only restricting the freedom of expression of those who are going to express themselves, but even of the platforms, the international platforms, from Google to Yahoo to everything else. And we need to be real if we are going to basically integrate with the rest of the world. We need to be real. We need to get out of this closed mentality. There's no question about it. Otherwise we can't. So you are absolutely right. People will want human rights upheld. It has been. I was an international banker and then became a local banker. When the garments industry came, I had to go and look at Sri Lankan factories to see that women were not being exploited in those factories and sign off so that those markets will take those garments. What you are saying is correct. As we move forward and we get into trade, we will have to be conscious that we are upholding international human rights standards.
You know, I hear again what you say, and it's very interesting, but how do you present to the world that Sri Lanka's acting police chief has been found at fault by the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka, and they have asked that disciplinary action be taken against him and I think 2 or 3 other officers in one particular instance? How do you present that to the world when you have a police chief, acting may be true, but who's the head of the police and who has been found at fault by the Supreme Court of the country?
Faraz, we can't give any excuses. The present president, if he is serious about turning this economy around, needs to take action. Because if justice doesn't prevail and the rule of law doesn't prevail and the Supreme Court's decision is not being upheld by the executive of the country, then we clearly have a problem. That is why we need a change, not in Parliament, we need a change of the President itself if he is unable to uphold the decisions of the Supreme Court.
Well, the Supreme Court only a few days ago made sure in that judgment that they explained that the President, although he has all these executive powers, one of the constitutional requirements of a president is to uphold the law.
It is certainly, and that's why I said if President Ranil Wickramaratne is not going to uphold the decisions of the Supreme Court, he better go home.
But we've got a few more. Sorry, we've got a few more minutes. So let me ask you this question, because it's back to the cost of living. The utilities costs have soared. They're so high that one would think it's an airplane. You know, are these people who run the utilities, are they muddle-headed? Have they been muddle-headed for the last 30 plus years? How can you bring the cost of the utilities down? Is there so much of wastage, for example? Has your party looked into it?
Yeah, so one of the issues with utilities is these are monopolies. Where the monopolies are owned by government or the private sector, always it's to the disadvantage of the consumer. This is the problem. And in Sri Lanka, for the last 50 years, we've always talked about the rights of workers. We have always talked about it, and we've tried to safeguard the rights of workers. SJB, we certainly want to uphold the rights of workers. But there is one principle that trumps it, that is citizens and consumers come first. And that hasn't been really discussed or talked about. And therefore, when you bring the issue of utilities, citizens and consumers come first. So bringing the cost of utilities down, bringing the cost of electricity down is absolutely essential, not only for the house, but it's also essential if we are going to go into industries and into manufacturing and things like that. So one is the monopoly situation, and how can the monopoly be eased? That's one. The second thing I would say is we are basically gone from hydroelectricity, and now we are dependent a lot on fossil fuels. We need to go into sustainable energy. Studies have been done and shown that Sri Lanka's potential in sustainable energy, sun yes, but certainly wind, huge potential, and we need to exploit it. So big is the potential that it's not just for the consumption in the country. The potential is there to actually export it. We've done some studies. It's in our policy to give first place for it. We don't have the capital to exploit that opportunity. We will have to be open to international investment in exploiting that opportunity. But we need to do this in a transparent manner. This is where the whole issue that comes off in the accusations on corruption. We need to do it in a transparent manner. And once we do that, right, we can not only meet our needs at a lower cost, we can also start exporting this. We know in the region, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, all have arrangements in actually selling their energy. Sri Lanka is not in that picture. But I have recently got involved in a conversation with parliamentarians in the region and looking at the possibility of Sri Lanka getting there. I'm aware that the government of Sri Lanka is also having discussions on this particular thing and trying to see if we can actually connect so that we could actually sell some of our energy even to India.
Well, I hear that, and I also note that President Wickramaratne was in Davos in Switzerland, and he made an urge, an appeal, if you like, for investment in this very particular sector. But once again, the world will want to know how Sri Lanka is doing in terms of its human rights record, in terms of the application and implementation of the rule of law. And certainly matters like having a questionable person to head the police force is, you can't get away from that, because the world will take notice of these things. But I want to finally ask you, in terms, because these elections are sort of swirling around, the winds of change perhaps are with us here in Sri Lanka. What makes your party's candidate distinctive?
I would start by saying that there are no perfect leaders. I often say this, whether it's in the corporate sector, whether it's in politics and so forth. And if you look at Sri Lanka over a period of time, often people thought when we got the presidential system 40 years ago, that these individuals will just transform this country. Our history shows that that has not been possible. And therefore, leadership is about relativity. There is something about Sajith Premadasa, our leader, and that is Sajith Premadasa has not been accused of amazing wealth, buying houses, having foreign accounts and putting his money overseas and things like that. He hasn't been accused of that kind of personal corruption and accumulation of wealth. Sajith Premadasa, right, is a knowledgeable person. He has had an education, he's knowledgeable, he's well read. If you communicate with him, you know that. Then people ask me about what about experience level. That experience issue for politicians, generally it depends on what experience. They have political experience, but they may not have commercial experience, corporate experience and so forth. But then look at all Sri Lankan leaders. Mahinda Rajapaksa, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, Ranil Wickramaratne, political experience, but I'm talking about other experience.
You've mentioned three names, Mr. Wickramaratne. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, we can safely say that he was a failed leader and that he misled, unfortunately, the people were all let down. 6.9 million people voted for him. What drove those people to vote for this man? What was it?
I can't explain about the literacy rate, if you want, a political literacy rate of the Sri Lankan Parliament. But this is the difference. A good leader, right? I won't claim that Sajith Premadasa has all the experience, but leaders don't have to have all the experience in every field. What leaders need, this is a true leader, is to recognize that problems are complex and complex problems need to be fixed. You need the expertise and therefore you need a team which has the expertise to do so. Sajith Premadasa recognizes that and he is assembling a team. And I say to any voter, a Sri Lankan voter across the country, like look at not only the policies, look at the team that a leader is bringing to the table. And that team won, right? There's no question that they must be above board if you're talking about their character. But importantly, they need to have experience. Experience is important, right? I can, learn about maybe the woodwork industry by reading about it. I can't go and tell a person who is doing woodwork how to do it. That's the gap. And lots of politicians there have never ever worked. Some of these parties in the left, particularly in the left, they have come into politics at the age of 15, 16, 17 and 18. They have never really worked. They have held a board, they know to protest, they know how to hold a microphone, they know how to tell a good story. Leave alone running a supermarket, they haven't even run a little shop in the corner. Even that they haven't done. Absolutely no experience. So I would say the team, look at the team, look at the experience of the team. What have they done in the past? Have they delivered in the past? And then finally I would say education. I would put experience above education and whether they are educated. So it's not one leader who is going to change it. A good leader will have a good team, and I believe that Sajith Premadasa recognizes that and is assembling the best possible team for the country.
Thank you very much, Eran Wickramaratne from the SJB, and wish you all the best. Thank you for being on Provoking Thought with Faraz. Do remember to subscribe to the channel. Thank you, take care, and God bless you all.